Hello and welcome back. The 2024 World Chess Championship. Gukesh, Ding. We just had a rest day, which means that both players, they were tied. 1.5, 1.5. They got a lot to think about on both sides. Each got a win in pretty convincing fashion. Both players have looked shaky in the event so far. So for many reasons, I was under the impression, along with many others, that today's game would be very important. So let's get into it. Now, Ding gets the white pieces again, and to be honest, he hasn't really made too much of a splash with the white pieces. He starts with a new move, knight to f3, and after d5, we see the move e3. And already, as I'm looking at this, I'm just feeling like, okay, Ding better have something up his sleeve here, because chess works in a way that you generally take the center. That's why. In all the beginner series, it's like, well, e4, d4 are the main moves for a reason. Now at this level, many moves are playable, so especially in a world championship match, Ding is obviously doing something like this with purpose. He's not just playing knight f3 and e3 for no reason at all. But still, I was waiting to see what the idea was in the opening, because if you don't have something specific, then I'll start to be critical of this decision pretty quickly. Gukesh, in the meantime, d5, knight f6, so far just being very natural. b3 played, bishop f5, bishop e2. Sometimes the move order, is important to pay attention to b3 and not bishop b2 right away. Why would the bishop go to e2? Often it is the move knight to h4. So in this position, we see h6, whereas if e6 was played, then knight h4, and the bishop does not really have access to these two squares. Of course, the bishop can go here, but that's what white wants. Bishop e4, then something like d3, and we will get the bishop pair here. So this move actually just covers the g4 square and does have a little bit of an idea. So maybe you shouldn't play e6. That's pretty much what that move means. Gukesh, obviously up to the task, plays h6 in this one, and bishop a3. So not only did Ding delay bishop b2, but he actually changed the move entirely and turned it into bishop a3. So I wondered, is this the idea of this opening? Because if he just played bishop b2 and castle, I'm ready to say, okay, I don't really understand what the purpose of the opening is. Now, bishop a3 does have some idea. Of course, black wants to do this, but if the bishop gets taken on f8, then doesn't matter if the king or the rook take back, black cannot castle. So it kind of forces the next couple moves. Knight bd7, because obviously white's just going to castle and continue development himself, but now Gukesh can play the move e6. The bishop on f8 can be taken, but naturally black is going to take with the knight. So I thought that this position right here was one that if Ding was preparing this idea, he could easily foresee that this would happen. Now, after the move c4, and you can see that Ding, especially with the time usage, is very much, in a position that he would have been familiar with, which makes sense to me. If you're coming up with this idea in the opening as white, c4, knight back to d7, knight to c3, you probably know what's going on. But knight c3 took some time from Ding. So now I'm starting to wonder, okay, what's coming next? Because it's one thing to trade those bishops, but for black, the inconvenience is rather mild at best, right? We've taken the bishop, we've just brought the knight back. Black can play c6, castles, and yeah, the dark square bishops have been traded, and maybe with all these light square pawns, we could say that that was officially black's good bishop, so the bishop that's not on the same color as the pawns, but the light square bishop for black is outside of the pawn chain, which is important to remember. It means that it's actually not, let's say, locked in on c8 would be a terrible piece. No, the bishop's actually quite fine. So still I'm waiting for Ding to really show some advantage, and I actually thought after castles here, takes on d5, takes back, and b4. Personally, I know this isn't much, but I actually liked Ding's position here. Gukesh has done nothing wrong, and if you look at this with the engine evaluation, it's probably going to say 0.00. But in my opinion, Ding's position is very decent here. Obviously, black with this pawn structure has to be happy, but I just generally like the knight coming to d4, the a pawn going up the board, which is exactly what Ding was going for. And then if black wants to stop that with a6, we really do get this position that white would be thrilled with for any type of endgame. And I've seen that these kind of positions can go pretty well for white. Just putting all the pawns on dark squares, the presence of light squared bishops. So I was mildly optimistic when I saw this position. I liked the move b4. However, if I'm being honest here, as I've been saying, the inconvenience for black is pretty much, just not even noticeable. So Gukesh cannot be upset with the position that he got. Knight d4, bishop h7. This is why the pawn's on h6. Tuck the bishop back. Bishop g6 completely playable here. So bishop h7, bishop g6 more of a preference move. Normally, this move is something that you actually do consider after knight d4, just because there's no knight h4, no knight e5. And surprisingly, although this is maybe more of an advanced moment, bishop h7 is actually sometimes not as good because there are back rank checkmate threats in the future. That sounds so far out, but yeah, the king basically runs into his own bishop here. So queen b3, knight e5, a4. This is exactly what I personally expected. If we see the move a6, then between these two moves, maybe in some order, maybe in the exact order that I've just played them, the knight will have to move. And yeah, I really like this position for white. I think this is exactly what you're going for. Dark square pawns plus a knight controlling, maybe rook c1. D3 can be played in the future, but it's not necessary to play right now. And an interesting move, f5, is always on the cards, just to completely lock that bishop out of the game. So this is what I would say is the ideal position. Instead, we see the move b6. So Gukesh, I would say this is the first really critical decision he's had to make all game. It hasn't looked like a struggle for black, but I promise you, white is not up to nothing here. There's definitely a positional game being played by Ding. So even though I found that the opening was rather timid, I didn't really mind the game that he got. However, after the move b6, especially after a 12 minute think here, knight f3 was played. And I thought that this move was a little bit low energy. It offers a trade. It's definitely a move that I can understand because it doesn't carry a lot of risk to it. But in this position, I was wondering about that idea f4, and then I realized it probably was just too much. So maybe we take here just to establish an open file for white's rook. If we do this, yes, I'm looking at knight d7 and I'm very happy with what I see. Maybe there's even a b5 move, getting the knight into c6. d5 is weak here. But the move knight c4 is actually bothersome here, because if we take it, we can see that this d3 square is starting to be targeted by black's pieces. And the move c5 is the perfect example. The bishop shows up on d3 next, winning the exchange. That's a big problem. So this f4 move that white's kind of relying on, unfortunately here, it does appear that knight c4 is not only playable, but probably very, very good. Interestingly, we can maybe continue the fight with rook a2, trying to play like this. Now, after the rook moves, we would again be threatening to take it. But I don't know what's happening here, and I can appreciate how this is not the game you want to play. c5 is available. I don't know about this sort of lateral defense, so yeah, it's a very risky way to play, and Ding has shown us, especially with the white pieces, he's not there to take pretty intense risks. I wonder if that strategy is going to pay off with him, because it does feel like that makes his games with the white pieces just a little bit uninspired. So knight f3 was played, not going into any of those lines, maybe for good reason though, as I've just pointed out with a few examples there. But takes d4, and from this point you can kind of just feel the air being sucked out of the position a little bit. Knight e2, very solid position, but now Gukesh has officially solved all his problems, and the move bishop e4 kind of cements that feeling. So rook d1, trades are forced. I mean, you can't allow double pawns here. Takes, and at this point, like I said, you can just sort of feel the energy as everything gets liquidated off the board. Everything's been traded, more trades, pawns are even. Yes, black has this pass pawn over here, but you could also consider this pawn a bit of a weakness. And honestly, yeah, no need to spend too much time on these moves here. The players both have tons of time on their clock, and the moves themselves are not too dangerous. Not a lot going on. Queen e4, queen d5, and basically at the end of the game here, the material is even. It's a rook end game. These guys are, literally at the top level of chess. There's absolutely nothing doing here. And the game ends in a repetition at the end. So we have a draw in game 4 here. And what does this mean? Personally, I think if you're Gukesh, you're nothing but happy, right? You played with the black pieces again. You earned a draw again, which is, let's be clear, always a good result with the black pieces. But you've also done it in a way, in my opinion, that shows you're completely fine. Ding, for me, hasn't shown enough with the white pieces yet. It's just looked like kind of one small attempt at something, but then Gukesh plays, of course, a reasonable opening, and Ding always defaults to more of a passive selection that takes no risks. Whereas Gukesh, with the white pieces, for better or for worse, is definitely ready to take those risks in the pursuit of an advantage. And we saw that, even in game 1 when Gukesh lost, he was playing moves like g4 and taking those risks. So I wonder if that strategy will pay off or not. Obviously, this means the next game is really important, because it just feels like Gukesh is the one pushing the pace a little bit now after a tough start. He's the one taking risks with the white pieces. For me, it just comes down to those games where Ding has black, because if Gukesh overpresses, more like game 1, takes too many risks, Ding could be saying, look, my strategy is make a draw with the white pieces, not fully intentionally, but I'm happy with that. And then with black, I know Gukesh is pushing a little bit more, so some risks can be taken there. So we'll see how this develops. Personally, I definitely looking at this, and easy to be critical of Ding with the white pieces here, but I don't think there's anything too serious happening yet. So let's wait to see the next game tomorrow, where Ding will have the black pieces and Gukesh has white. Because if Gukesh pushes a really nice game and wins it, then you look back on this and you're like, well, what's going on here? The pattern is showing. Ding is just not doing anything with white. Meanwhile, Gukesh is maximizing. So tomorrow's game for me after this result becomes super important. And as always, I will bring you guys the recap tomorrow morning after that game.